Book 6. The first place to distribute cereal-producing crops to mortals long ago was gloriously famous Athens. Athens, too, reshaped lives and enacted laws, and was the first to give the sweet source of comfort for life, when she bore a man found to possess such intelligence, who once spoke everything from his truth-revealing mouth. Even after his death, because of his divine discoveries, his glory, announced long ago, is now raised to the sky. For when he saw that nearly all things that need demands for living were ready close at hand for mortals, and that to the extent they could, their life abide secure, that powerful people overflowed with wealth, honor, praise, and excelled others in the fine reputation of their children, and that still nonetheless at home their hearts were anxious, and despite their thoughts caused trouble for their lives without any pause, and were compelled to rage with furious complaints, he realized then that the vessel was the cause of its own defect, and all things within it were corrupted by its defect, all that are brought together and come from outside, even good things. Partly because he saw it was leaky and full of holes, so that in no way could it ever be filled up. Partly because he perceived that it completely polluted, so to speak, everything which it had taken in with a noxious taste. And so he removed impurities from our hearts with his truth-revealing words, and placed a fixed limit on desire and fear. He set out what the highest good is towards which we all strive, and showed the way by which, on a little footpath, we might struggle towards it in a straight line. He showed what evil existed everywhere in human affairs, which arises and flies around variously, whether by natural chance or force, because nature has so determined, and from which gates it was best to confront each evil. And he proved that for the most part the human race in vain rolled sad waves of cares in their hearts. For just like children who tremble and fear everything in the dark night, so we are afraid in the light sometimes of things that ought to be no more feared than the things that children tremble at and imagine will happen. Therefore this fear and darkness of the mind must be shattered, apart not by the rays of the sun and the clear shafts of the day, but by the external appearance and inner law of nature. Therefore I will proceed further to weave my theme in words. And since I have shown that the regions of the heavens are sure to perish, and that the sky is made up of a body which has been born, and since I have unraveled almost everything that happens in it, and must happen, take notice of what still remains, since once to climb up on the glorious chariot, of winds arise, they are calmed, how all things that were raging are calmed, turned aside from their fierce anger, and other things that mortals see occur on land and sea, when often they hang in suspense with terrifying thoughts, and which make their minds grovel with fear of the gods, and press them deep down to the ground, because their ignorance of causes forces them to attribute things to the supreme command of gods and give way to their rule, the causes of whose activities they can in no way understand, and they imagine they take place through divine power. For those who have learned well that the gods live a tranquil life, if still at times they wonder in what way things can take place, especially in those events which are seen in the shores of heaven above their heads, are brought back again to ancient religious beliefs, and take on harsh masters, whom they believe in their misery to be all-powerful, ignorant of what can be and what cannot. In short, by what process each thing has its power limited in its deep-set boundary stone, so that all the more they are led astray by blind reasoning. Unless you spit such things from your mind and completely abandon thoughts unworthy of the gods and foreign to their peace, the holy divinity of the gods, diminished by you, will often harm you. Not that the great power of the gods can be disturbed, so that it thirsts in anger to exact harsh punishment, but since you yourself will suppose that they, though calm in placid peace, set rolling great waves of anger. Neither will you approach the god's shrines with placid heart, nor have strength enough to receive with tranquil peace of mind these images that travel from their holy bodies, announcing the outward appearance of the gods to human minds. You can see the sort of life that now follows from this, and indeed, so that the truest reasoning might drive such a life far from us, although I have set forth many words, still many remain and must be adorned in polished verses. The outward appearance and inner workings of the sky must be grasped, stormy weather and flashing thunderbolts must be celebrated in song, how they act and by what cause they are borne along. So you do not divide the regions of the sky and frantically worry from where flying fire has come or to which of the two parts it then turns, how it wends its way through walled places, and how, Lord of all, it makes its exit, the causes of whose activities they can in no way understand, and they imagine they take place through divine power. And you, Calliope, point out for me as I run my course the white chalk finish line, skilled muse that you are, repose of humans and pleasure of gods, so that, with you leading, I might win the crown with glorious praise. First, the blue expanse of the sky is shaken by thunder, because clouds aloft flying along on high clash together as winds fight one another. For noise does not arise from a clear part of the sky, but wherever clouds are arranged in denser formation, the more often there arises from them roaring with great rumbling. Besides, clouds can neither have so dense a structure as stones and wood do, nor in turn are they as insubstantial as mists and smoke, quick to fly away. For then they must either fall, weighed down by sheer weight like rocks, or like smoke fail to hold together, and be unable to contain icy snow and showers of hail. They also produce sound above the surface of the spreading heavens, just as the awning creaks at times when it is stretched over great theaters and is tossed about among the poles and beams, and sometimes it flutters wildly, split by unruly winds, and calls to mind the crackling sound of papyrus sheets. For this type, too, you can recognize in thunder, or when drying clothes or flying papyrus sheets are beaten by breezes' blows and whipped up by the wind. For it sometimes happens, too, that clouds cannot clash head-on as much as pass by at an angle, with differing movements, slowly scraping their bodies together. Then that harsh sound rubs against the ears and continues for a long time, until they have left their narrow confines. In the following way, too, everything often seems to be struck by heavy thunder and rattle, and the massive walls of the capacious world to have been rent suddenly and leaped apart, when a gathered blast of a strong wind has suddenly twisted itself into the clouds, and, enclosed within, spinning and whirling more and more on all sides, forces the cloud to become hollow, its body thick all around. Next, when its force and fierce impulse weaken it, then with a terrifying crackle it splits open and roars. Nor is it surprising when a small little bladder full of air so often makes a small noise when it suddenly bursts. There is also a reason when winds flow through clouds that they make noise. For we often see clouds traveling along, rough-hewn and branching in many ways. Just as, of course, when the blasts of the northwest wind flow through a dense forest, the foliage sounds and the branches creak. It also happens that sometimes the rushing force of a strong wind cuts and bursts head-on through a cloud. For what a blast of wind can do on high is readily apparent here on earth, where it is gentler, since it still overturns tall trees, sucking them up by their deepest roots. There are also waves among the clouds which, so to speak, roar loudly when they break. This likewise happens in deep rivers and on the great sea, when the surging current breaks. It also occurs when the burning force of a thunderbolt passes from cloud to cloud. If the cloud that has received the fire by chance is extremely moist, it extinguishes it at once with a loud noise. So iron white hot from heated furnaces often hisses when we have doused it quickly in ice-cold water. Further, if a drier cloud receives the lightning fire, it ignites at once and begins to burn with a great sound, as if flames are forced to wander laurel-coiffed mountains, by a whirl of wind incinerating them with a massive assault. Nor is anything so consumed by crackling flame with a more terrible sound than the Delphic laurel leaves of Phoebus. Next, a great shattering of ice and deluge of hail often produce noise in the great clouds on high. For when the wind packs them tightly together, mountains of clouds, congealed into a narrow space and mixed with hail, are shattered. Lightning, likewise, occurs when clouds collide and expel many seeds of fire, just as if stone or iron strikes hard against stone, for then too light leaps out and fire scatters bright sparks. But it happens that we take in thunder with our ears later than our eyes see lightning, because things always arrive more slowly to our ears than things that move the eyes. One can recognize it from this. If you see from afar someone cutting the bulk of a tree with a double axe, it happens that you perceive the striking before the blow sends sound to the ears. So we also perceive the lightning before we receive the thunder that is sent out simultaneously with the fire from a similar cause, born from the same collision. In the following way also, clouds brush places with flying light, and a storm flashes with quivering assault. When the wind has invaded a cloud twisting around inside, and has made, as I have shown before, the hollow cloud thicken, it grows hot by its own speed, just as you see everything becomes hot and glow by motion, while a lead projectile even melts as it spins on its long trajectory. And so, when this burning wind has ruptured the black cloud, as if by force it suddenly squeezes out and scatters seeds of heat, which produce flickering flashes of flame. Next, noise follows which strikes our ears more slowly than those things which reach the vision of our eyes. Of course, this happens with clouds that are dense, and also heaped high on top of one another in wondrous array, lest you be deceived because we see from below their width, better than to what height they are heaped up and stand. For be sure to gaze closely when the winds transport clouds resembling mountains across the air above, or when you see them stacked on massive mountains on top of one another and pressing down from above, stationary when the wind has died down on all sides. Then you will be able to understand their great masses and to observe their caverns built up as if from hanging rocks, which when a storm arises and the winds fill them out, closed in by the clouds they show their anger, with great rumblings, and threaten like wild animals in their cages. Now here, now there, they emit growls in the clouds, and seeking an exit they turn around and roll the seeds of fire together from the clouds, and so assemble many, and spin the fire within the hollow furnaces, until the cloud is ripped apart and they gleam and flash with lightning. It happens, too, from the following cause that this quick, golden hue of liquid fire swoops down on the earth, because clouds themselves must possess many, many seeds of fire. For when they are without any moisture, their color for the most part is a brilliant flame red. For indeed they must receive many things from the light of the sun, so understandably they redden and pour forth fire. And so, when the driving wind thrusts them together, assembling and compressing them into one place, they squeeze and pour out seeds that make the colors of flame flash forth. There is lightning likewise, too, when the clouds of the sky thin out. For when the wind lightly undoes the clouds as they pass along and dissolves them, these seeds that produce lightning must fall reluctantly. Then lightning occurs without horrible fear and sound, and with no turmoil. As to the rest, With what nature thunderbolts are endowed is revealed by their strikes and branded in signs of heat, and marks exhaling thick fumes of sulfur. For these fires are not the signs of wind or rain. Moreover, often too, they ignite the roofs of houses, and with quick flames they completely dominate even the interiors. Nature, you know, made this fire the subtlest of fires, and constructed it with very tiny, quick-moving bodies. Nothing is able to block it in any way, for the powerful thunderbolt passes through the walls of houses, as do shouts and voices. It passes through rocks and bronze, and turns bronze and gold to liquid in a moment of time. Likewise, it makes wine instantly disappear, leaving the vessels untouched, since no doubt its heat, as it travels easily, loosens everything around it and makes the clay sides of the vessel porous, and winding its way inside, it quickly dissolves and scatters the first beginnings of the wine. This the heat of the sun is seen not to be able to accomplish in a lifetime, even though it is strong in its shimmering heat, so much more rapidly moving and dominant is this power of the thunderbolt. Now, how these things are created, and with what great force they are made, so they can split apart towers with their blows, demolish houses, snatch away beams and rafters, dislodge and move the monuments of men around, kill humans, lay livestock low everywhere, and by what force they can do other things of this type, I will explain, nor will I delay you any further with promises. Thunderbolts must be conceived to arise from clouds that are thick and stacked high, for none are ever sent when the sky is clear, nor when clouds are only slightly dense. Things clearly show beyond a doubt that this happens, because then clouds grow thick throughout all the air, so that we think that on all sides darkness has left Acheron behind, and fills up the vast caverns of the sky so greatly, when the bleak night of clouds has arisen, do the faces of black fear hang over us from above. When a storm begins to set its thunderbolts in motion. Moreover, very often too, a black cloud over the sea, like a river of pitch sent down from the sky, packed with darkness from afar, falls thus into the waves and drags along a black storm heavy with thunderbolts and violent blasts, itself stuffed as much as can be with fires and winds, so that on land also people shudder and seek cover. Thus, therefore, we must think that the storm extends high above our heads, nor would they cover over the lands with such darkness unless many clouds were built up on many others and blotted out the sun. Nor could they arrive and press down with such rains that they make rivers swell and plains swim, unless the heavens had clouds piled up high. So therefore, everything is filled with winds and fires, and thus on all sides growling and lightning come into existence. Indeed, I have shown above that hollow clouds have very many seeds of heat, and must take in many from the rays of the sun and the burning heat they possess. Thus, when the same wind that drives them together into a chance place has squeezed out many seeds of heat, and simultaneously mixes itself with this fire, a vortex enters there, and twists in the narrow space, and sharpens the thunderbolt to a point in the hot furnaces within. For it catches fire for two reasons. It grows hot itself by its own speed and by its contact with fire. Next, when the power of the wind has been superheated and the overpowering rush of fire has entered, then the thunderbolt, ripe, so to speak, suddenly splits the cloud apart, and the excited blaze travels illuminating all places with its shimmering light. This is followed by an overpowering sound, so that the regions of the sky above seem suddenly to explode and overwhelm the earth. Next, shaking overpowers and tests the earth, and murmuring rumblings race across the sky. For then almost the whole storm is shocked and trembles, and growling sounds are produced. From this shock follows heavy, plentiful rain, so that the whole upper air seems to have turned to rain, and to fall so quickly that it is calling all back to the flood. So great a shower is emitted by the splitting of clouds and blast of wind, when the sound flies forth with its flaming blow. It occurs also when a force of wind from outside races and falls upon a cloud pregnant with a ripe thunderbolt. When it splits the cloud, at once that fiery vortex falls, which in our native language we call a thunderbolt. This same thing happens in other directions wherever the force has traveled. It also happens that sometimes a force of wind, though sent without fire, nevertheless catches fire during the interval of its long travels, losing as it goes on its course certain large bodies that are not able to pass through the air with equal ease. And it sweeps up and conveys from the air itself other small bodies that when mixed create fire as they fly. This is not much different from how a lead projectile heats up on its trajectory when it has shed many bodies of icy coldness and caught on fire in the air. It also happens that the force of the very blow rouses fire when the frigid force of the wind sent without fire has struck, doubtless because when it has hit hard with a forceful strike, particles of heat can stream together from the wind itself, and simultaneously from that thing which then receives the blow. Just as fire flies out when we strike a stone with iron, nor because the force of the iron is frigid, do the seeds of hot flashing hurry together at its blow any more slowly. Therefore so too ought a thing to be kindled by a thunderbolt, if by chance it was well situated and suited for flames. Nor easily can that force of the wind be completely and absolutely frigid, which has been sent forth on high with such force. Rather, even if it is not kindled first with fire on its trajectory, yet still it will arrive warmed and mixed with heat. But the quick speed of the thunderbolt and its overwhelming strike happen, and thunderbolts usually zip along with such swift gliding, because the force itself is completely roused and gathered together beforehand, and acquires a great power of movement. Then, when the cloud is unable to contain the increasing impulse, the force is squeezed out and thus flies with wondrous impulse, like missiles travel that are launched from powerful siege engines. Add to this that it is composed of small light particles, nor is it easy for anything to offer resistance to such a substance. For it runs in between and penetrates empty passages, and thus is not impeded and delayed by many collisions, and for this reason it glides and flies with quick impulse. Next, add that all weights by nature always incline downwards. But when a blow has been added on to, the speed is doubled, and this impulse becomes more forceful, so that it scatters by blows more violently and more quickly whatever blocks its way, and proceeds along its path. Next, because it travels with long-lasting impulse, it ought to add greater and greater speed that increases as it goes and augments its sturdy strength and makes the blow harder. For it brings it about that whatever siege the thunderbolt has travel together straight into one place, so to speak, casting them all as they spin into the same course. Perhaps as it goes, it carries along from the air itself certain bodies that incite great speed by their blows. It passes harmlessly through things, and keeps many whole, because the liquid fire passes through their pores. And it pierces many things when the very particles of the thunderbolt have happened upon the particles of things where they are held interwoven. Further, it easily dissolves bronze and makes gold fuse instantly, since its force is made up in miniature scale of small bodies and of particles light in weight, which wins its way easily, and having winded, instantly dissolves all the connections and opens up the bonds. In autumn, the heavenly abode, adorned with gleaming stars, is shaken more often everywhere, as is the whole earth, and also when the flowering season of spring unfurls itself. For fires are absent from the cold, and in heat winds die down, and clouds do not possess so dense a composition. And so, when the seasons of the sky lie in between the two, then all the varying causes of the thunderbolt come together. For the fluctuating periods of the year mingle cold and hot, both of which a cloud needs to build thunderbolts, so that there be discord among things, and the air with great tumult is tossed about in turmoil by fire and wind. For the first part of heat is the last of rigid cold, that is springtime. Therefore dissimilar things must fight among themselves and cause turmoil when mixed. And when the last heat mixed with the first cold rolls around, a time which is referred to by the name of autumn, then also sharp winters conflict with summers. Therefore these should be named the transition points of the year. Nor is it surprising if during this time many thunderbolts arise, and a turbulent tempest is roused in the sky, since disturbance occurs with doubtful war on both sides, here with flames, there with winds and moisture combined. This is to investigate the true nature of the fiery thunderbolt, and to see by what force it does each thing, not by unrolling the Etruscan divination books in vain, to seek out signs of the hidden intention of the gods, from where flying fire has come, or to which of the two parts it then turns, how it wins its way through walled places, and how, Lord of all, it makes its exit, or what harm a blow of thunderbolt from the sky can do. But if Jupiter and the other divinities make the gleaming regions of the sky shake violently with terrifying noise, and toss fire wherever each one wills, why don't they make those who failed to guard against loathsome crime be struck, and breathe out flames of lightning from their pierced breast, a pointed lesson for mortals? Why, rather, is one who feels no guilt about anything engulfed and caught up in flames, although innocent, suddenly swept away by a fiery heavenly whirlwind? And why do they aim at deserted places and labor in vain? Or are they exercising their forearms and toning up their biceps? Why do they allow their father's weapon to be blunted by the earth? Why does he himself allow it and not save them for his enemies? Again, why does Jupiter never toss lightning at the earth and pour forth thunder when the sky is clear all round? Or as soon as the clouds form, does he himself then descend into them and direct the blow of his weapon from close in? For what purpose further does he launch them at the sea? With what does he accuse the waves, the massive waters, and swimming plains? Besides, if he wants us to look out for the strike of a thunderbolt, why does he refrain from letting us see it being launched? If, however, he wants to catch us by surprise with fire, why does he thunder from there so we can avoid it? Why gather darkness, deep rumbling and roaring beforehand? And how can you believe that he launches his thunderbolts at the same time in many directions? Or do you dare to maintain that it has never happened that many strikes have taken place at one time? But it has very frequently happened, and must necessarily happen, just as it rains and showers fall in many regions, so many lightning bolts occur at one time. Finally, why does he shatter the sacred shrines of the gods and his own renowned sanctuaries with a savage thunderbolt, and split apart beautifully wrought statues of the gods, and subtract dignity from his own images with a wanton wound? And why does he aim at lofty places, and why do we notice most traces of his fire on mountaintops? As to the rest, it is easy to understand from the following things how what the Greeks call prestors, because of their nature, are sent down from on high into the sea. For it sometimes happens that what looks like a column drops down and descends from sky to sea. The water boils furiously around it, stirred up by blasts of wind, and whatever ships are then caught up in this tumult are pummeled over and undergo the greatest danger. This happens at times when the force of the wind is roused, and tries in vain to burst a cloud, instead depressing it, so that what looks like a column drops down from sky to sea, little by little, as if something is pushed out from above by a fist and the thrust of an arm and stretches out to the waves. When it splits the cloud, the force of the wind bursts forth from it into the sea and causes an astounding seething among the waves. For a revolving whirlwind descends and leads down at the same time that cloud endowed with supple body. And as soon as it thrusts the cloud down on the expanse of the sea, it immediately injects itself whole and stirs up the entire sea, forcing it to seethe with tremendous noise. It happens, too, that a vortex of wind on its own entangles itself in the clouds, scrapes together seeds of cloud from the air, and imitates a sort of prester descending from the sky. When it has let itself down on the earth and has dissolved, it spews forth a huge force of whirlwind and storm. But since this happens altogether rarely and mountains must offer an obstacle on earth, the same thing appears more frequently in the great prospect of the sea and in the open sky. Clouds are formed when many bodies, rougher ones, come together suddenly as they fly in this space of sky above. The bodies, though but tenuously entangled, are able to hold together, packed closely with another. These at first cause little clouds to form, which then catch hold of each other and flock together, and by joining together grow larger and are carried by the winds, until the point at which a fierce storm breaks out. It happens, too, that mountain tops, the nearer they are to the sky, the more at that exalted height they smoke, continuously, with the dark mist of a dust-yellow cloud. This occurs because, when clouds first form, so thin the eyes cannot see them yet, the winds carry and force them to highest mountain tops. Here at last it happens that gathered and packed together in a great throng they are able to become visible, and they seem to rise as one from the top of the mountain into the upper air. For that high places are exposed and windy, the facts themselves and our senses reveal when we climb high mountains. Moreover, too, clothes hung on the shore reveal that nature takes a very great number of bodies from the whole sea when they receive a coating of moisture. So it seems more likely that many bodies are also able to rise from the salty motion of the sea to increase the clouds, for the whole nature of the moistures is deeply related. Moreover, we see rising up from every river and the earth itself too, cloudy mist and hot vapor, which like an exhalation are forced out from those places, and are carried upwards and suffuse the sky with their darkness, little by little constructing clouds on high by coming together. For the heat of the starry ether above also presses down, and by condensing weaves clouds together beneath the blue sky. It happens, too, that those bodies which create clouds and flying storm clouds enter into our atmosphere from outside. For I have demonstrated that their number is beyond numbering, and the extent of the heavenly depths is infinite, and I have set out with what speed these bodies fly, and how in an instant they are accustomed to travel across an indescribably large space. It is not, therefore, amazing if often, in a short amount of time, a storm and darkness tower above and cover over land and sea with great storm clouds, seeing that on all sides, through all the pores of the ether, and round about through all the breathing holes, as it were, of the great world, exits and entrances are provided for the elements. Now come, I will explain how raindrops are formed in lofty storm clouds, and are sent down and fall onto the earth as showers. First then I will succeed in proving that many seeds of water rise up with the clouds themselves from all things, and both grow equally. Both clouds and whatever water exists in clouds, just as our own bodies grow equally with our blood, and sweat too, and in short, whatever moisture is in the limbs. So too they often take in much moisture from the sea, like hanging fleeces of wool, when winds carry clouds along above the great sea. Similarly, moisture is lifted up from all the rivers into the clouds. There, when many seeds of water have assembled in many ways, increased from every side, the densely packed clouds strive to release moisture in two ways. For the force of the wind thrusts, and the very abundance of clouds, gathered together in a greater throng, pushes and presses from above and makes showers pour out. Moreover, when the clouds are thinned out by the wind too, or dissolved, struck hard from above by the sun's heat, they let loose and drip raindrops like wax over a hot fire, melts away and flows freely. But violent showers occur when clouds are violently squeezed by both forces, their own accumulation and the wind's assault. But rains are accustomed to last a while and linger a long time, when many seeds of water are stirred up and clouds, one on top of the other, and dripping storm clouds, are carried far and wide in every direction. And when the entire earth steams and breathes back the moisture. Then, when the sun with its rays gleams amid the dark storm with the spray of the storm clouds set directly opposite, then the colors of the rainbow stand out amid the black clouds. Other things that grow above and are created above, and that grow in thickness in the clouds, all of them, absolutely all. Snow, winds, hail, and ice-cold frosts, and the great power of ice, the great hardener of waters, and delayer, which everywhere reigns in eager rivers. It is still very easy to discover these things, and to perceive with the mind how they happen and why they are created, when you understand well what qualities the elements possess. Now come and see what explanation exists for earthquakes. And first be sure to think that the earth below, as it is above, is filled in every place with windy caves, and holds in its hollow places many lakes and many pools and steep cliffs and precipitous rocks. And it must be thought that many rivers beneath the earth's surface cause waves and submerged rocks to roll violently. For the facts themselves require it to be everywhere similar to itself. Therefore, with these things subjoined and employed as substructure, the earth trembles above when it is shaken by a great collapse, when time eats away from beneath huge caves below. Indeed, entire mountains fall, and suddenly there is a great shock, and tremors scurry out far and wide from there. And with good reason, since houses next to a road, shaken throughout by wagons of no great height, tremble, no less than wagons jump whenever a road pebble jolts the ironclad circles of the wheels on both sides. It happens too when a huge mass is toppled by age from the earth into great and vast pools of water, that the earth also sways and is shaken by the water's undulations, just as at times a container is unable to be still unless the liquid within stops being rocked in unsteady undulations. Moreover, when the wind gathered throughout the hollowed-out places of the earth pushes forward from one part and thrusts and slams against lofty caves with great force, the earth leans to where the headlong force of the wind presses. Then towering homes constructed on the surface of the earth, the more each one of them is built up towards the sky, the more they sway and threaten, projecting in the same direction, and the beams are pushed forward and suspended, ready to move. And yet they are afraid to believe that some time of complete destruction and dissolution awaits the nature of the great world, when they see so great a mass of earth leaning over. If the winds did not pause for breath, no force could restrain things, nor be able to hold them back from destruction as they go. But since they pause for breath and increase their force in turn, and as it were regroup, rally, are repulsed and retreat, for this reason the earth more often threatens ruin than accomplishes it. for it leans ahead and sways back again, and slipping forward returns the mass to its own location. So thus do all buildings sway, the top more than the middle more than the top, the bottom a teeny bit. This too is a cause of that same great shaking, when wind and some huge force of air suddenly, coming together from outside or inside the earth itself, has hurled itself into the hollow places of the earth, and there first roars tumultuously within great caves, and travels and twists all around, and after, when the force is aroused and stirred up, it bursts out and at the same time deeply splits the earth and creates a great chasm. This happened at Sidon in Syria, and occurred at Aegium in the Peloponnese, both cities that this outblast of air and the resulting movement of the earth threw into great turmoil. Moreover, many city walls have collapsed because of great movements in the earth, and many cities have sunk down to destruction at the bottom of the sea along with their own citizens. But even if it doesn't burst forth, still the very impulse of the air and fierce force of the wind is distributed throughout the numerous passageways of the earth, like a shiver, and thus instills trembling, as when a chill works its way deep into our joints and strikes them, forcing them to tremble and shake unwillingly. So humans live in their cities in double fear. They fear the buildings above and dread the hollows below, lest the nature of the earth dissolve them suddenly into pieces, or lest torn asunder it spreads wide its jaws, and in its disorder wishes to fill them with its own ruins. Accordingly, let them believe as they wish that the heavens and earth will continue to be imperishable, their case entrusted to eternal safety. Yet still at times a clear and present force of danger also applies this goad of fear from somewhere or other, that the earth may be suddenly snatched from beneath our feet and carried into the abyss, and that the whole sum of things may completely collapse and follow, and that a jumbled wreck of a world may result. First of all, some wonder that nature does not increase the sea, into which there is such a great downrush of water, into which all rivers come from every direction. Add the passing rains and storms that fly by, which sprinkle and soak all seas and lands, add the sea's own fountains. Still, compared to the sum of the sea, all these will be an augmentation of scarcely a drop. So it is less wondrous that the great sea is not augmented. Moreover, the sun subtracts a great part by its heat, for indeed we see that clothes soaked through by moisture are dried out by the glowing rays of the sun, by the hot glowing rays of the sun. And yet we see that there are many seas spread out widely. Accordingly, let the sum sip away as small amount of liquid as you wish out of every place from the sea, yet in so great a space it subtracts substantially from the waves. Furthermore, the winds too are able to take away a great portion of liquid by sweeping the seas, since we very often see that in one night roads dry out and soft layers of mud grow hard. Moreover, I have shown that clouds too take away much moisture gathered from the great surface of the deep, and scatter it here and there among the whole circle of lands, when it rains on earth and winds transport the clouds along. Finally, seeing that the earth is endowed with a porous body and is closely joined to the sea, everywhere girding its shores, the moisture of water, just as it goes from earth to sea, ought likewise to spread onto land from the salt sea. For the brine is filtered, and the substance of the water drips back, and all flows together at the sources of rivers, whence it returns over the earth in a freshwater current, on which path once cut it carries its waves on liquid foot. Now I will explain the reason why fires sometimes are exhaled through the jaws of Mount Etna with so great a swirling blast. For the fiery storm broke out with no small disaster and played the tyrant throughout the fields of the Sicilians, turning the eyes of neighboring nations upon itself, when they saw every region of the sky smoke and send out sparks, and filled their breasts with anxious care about what new disturbance nature was setting in motion. You must look broadly and deeply at these matters, and look carefully about at a distance in all directions, so that you might recall to mind that the sum of things is vast, and see how tiny a part one heaven is of the whole sum of things, how infinitesimal it is, not so great a part as one person is of the whole earth. If you clearly gaze at and clearly see this, that is well set out, you would cease wondering at many things. For none of us wonders, do we, if someone has caught a fever arising together with burning heat in his limbs, or some other pain in his members caused by disease. For the foot suddenly begins to swell, a sharp pain often assails the teeth and even invades the eyes. Sacred fire develops and creeps through the body, burning whatever part it has assailed, and crawls along through the limbs. Doubtless because seeds of many things exist, and this earth and sky bear enough evil disease, from which the power of immeasurable disease can grow up. In this way, then, we must suppose that all things are well supplied, from the infinite to the whole sky and earth, so that the earth is able to be shaken around suddenly and moved, and a fast-moving whirlwind tear through sea and land, the fires of Etna to overflow, and the sky to start to blaze. For this also happens, and the regions of the sky ignite, and rainstorms appear in heavier assemblage, when by chance the seeds of water have thus collected themselves. No, the wild heat of the conflagration is too huge. Of course, so too a river, which seems the largest to him who has never before seen a larger one, and a tree and person seem huge, and all very large things of every kind, which everyone sees, these he imagines are huge, when all, even with the sky and earth and sea, are nothing compared to the whole sum of the entire universe. Nevertheless, I will now explain how that flame, suddenly roused, breathes forth out of the vast furnaces of Etna. First, the whole mountain is by nature hollow underneath, supported for the most part by basalt caverns. Further, there is wind and air present in all the caves. For air becomes wind when it has been stirred up and agitated, when the wind has grown very hot and raging has heated all the rocks and earth around where it touches them, and from them has struck out fire hot with swift flames, it rises and so drives itself high from its straight jaws. And so it carries its heat far. Far it spreads its ashes and rolls out smoke with dense darkness, and at the same time expels rocks of amazing weight. Do not doubt that this is the wild power of the wind. Moreover, in large part the sea crashes its waves against the roots of the mountain and swallows its surge again. From this sea, caves stretch beneath right to the lofty jaws of the mountain. By this path, we must confess that wind mixed with water travels, and the situation compels it often to rise, and to penetrate deeply from the open sea, and to breathe out and thus lift up the flame, and to throw up rocks and raise clouds of sand. For on the highest peak are craters, as they call them, which we, for our part, call jaws or mouths. There are also a number of things for which it is insufficient to give one cause, but many, only one of which nevertheless is true, just as if you yourself were to see lying at a distance a lifeless body of a person. It would be fitting to name all causes of death, so as to name the one true cause of his death. For you would not be able to prove that he died by sword or from cold or from disease or by poison, as might be the case, but we know that it was something of this very sort that fell upon him. Likewise, we can say the same in many cases. The Nile, river of all Egypt, alone on earth, increases its size in the summer and spreads over the plains. It normally irrigates Egypt in the middle of blazing heat, either because in summer the north winds are against its mouths, at the time of year when these winds are called Etesian, and blowing against the river they delay it, and forcing the waves back they cause it to swell and force it to wait. For beyond a doubt, these gusts, which are driven out from the icy stars of the pole, move against the river. The river comes from the south out of the heat-bearing places, arising from deep within the midday region, among the black races of men with their well-baked color. It is also possible that a great heap of sand piles up against the river mouths, opposing its streams, when the sea, agitated by the winds, drives the sand inward. In this way it happens that the outlet of the river is less free, and likewise forward movement becomes less easy for its waves. It happens too, perhaps, that it rains more at its source at that time, when the Etesian gusts of the north winds drive all the clouds then into those places. It is evident that when they are driven to the midday region and come together, there the clouds at last, crammed against high mountains, are condensed and compressed by force. Perhaps from deep among the high mountains of the Ethiopians it grows, when the sun, illuminating everything with its withering rays, drives the white snow to go down into the plains. Now come, I will explain to you with what nature whatever places and lakes considered Avernian are endowed. First, that they are called by the name Avernian is imposed on them because of the reality that they are injurious to all birds. Since when they have flown straight and reached these regions, forgetting how to row their wings, they lower their sails, droop with slackened neck, and plummet headlong to the earth. If it chances that is the nature of the locale, or into the water if it chances the lake of Avernus stretches below. This spot is near Cumae, where mountains filled with acrid sulfur smoke and are well supplied with hot springs. There is also a spot within the walls of Athens at the very top of the citadel, near the temple of life-giving Pallas Tritonus, where harsh-sounding crows never navigate their bodies with wings, not even when altars smoke with offerings. Thus, they do not flee the sharp wrath of Pallas because of their keeping watch, as the Greek poets sing. But the nature of the place accomplishes the job all on its own. In Syria also they say that likewise a spot can be seen, where as soon as four-footed beasts first trod, the very force of the place makes them collapse completely, as if they have been suddenly offered as a sacrifice to the shades below. All these things happen by natural processes, and from which causes they come, the origin is evident, so that it not be believed that there is a door of Orcus in these regions. Nor next should we think that the gods of the dead below happen to lead souls from here to the river banks of Acheron, as wing-footed stags are often thought to use their nostrils to draw the races of sleeping creatures from their hiding places. See how far removed this is from true reasoning, for I am now attempting to speak about the real facts. First, I say what I have often also said before. There are shapes of every kind of thing in the earth, many that are good for food and life-giving, and many that are able to induce diseases and hasten death along. And we have shown before that different things are more adapted to different living creatures for the purposes of life, on account of different natures, textures and primary shapes differing among themselves, the one from the other. Many hostile things pass through the ears, many, harmful and harsh to the touch, wander in through the nostrils themselves, and there are not a few things which must be avoided by touch, not a few things that must be shunned by sight, or are bitter in taste. Next, we may see how many things there are that are disgusting and noxious, having violently harmful sensations for people. First, the shade of certain trees is said to be so noxious that they often bring about headaches if anyone lies beneath them spread out on the grass. There exists also in the lofty mountains of Helicon a tree accustomed to kill people with the horrible smell of its flower. Of course, all these things arise from the earth because the earth bears many seeds of things, much mixed in many ways, and passes them on sorted individually. And when a light recently extinguished at night offends the nose with acrid fumes, it at once puts to sleep a person who is prone by disease to fall down and foam at the mouth, and a woman falls back put to sleep by noxious castor, and the elegant work slips out of her delicate hands, if she has smelled it at the time when she has her menstrual flow. And many other things besides make the drooping limbs slacken throughout the frame and shake the soul in its seat. Next, if you ever linger in a hot bathtub and are too full, how easily it happens that you fall down as you sit on a bath seat in the middle of the steaming water, and how easily the noxious force and smell of charcoal wins its way into the brain, unless we have taken water beforehand. But when a fiery fever has taken hold of the limbs of a person, then the smell of wine has a force equivalent to a sacrificial blow. Don't you see also that sulfur too is formed in the earth itself, and that pitch hardens into a mass with a foul smell? And when men pursue veins of silver and gold, probing deep within the hidden recesses of the earth with their tools, what smells Scaptensula breathes out from below? And what great evils gold mines may exhale, what they make people look like, what colors. Have you not seen or heard about how they usually die in a short time, how the supply of life is wanting for those whom the great force of necessity holds bound to such work? Therefore the earth exhales all these exhalations and breathes them forth out into the open expanses of the sky. Thus too Avernian locales must emit a discharge deadly to birds that rises from the earth into the air, so as to poison an area of the sky in one particular region. As soon as a bird is carried on its wings to that place, it is there held back and overpowered by the invisible poison, so that it falls straight down where the exhalation directs it. When it falls down there, the same force of this exhalation takes away what is left of life from all of the limbs. For indeed, at first, it provokes a certain kind of disturbance. It later happens that once they have fallen into the very source of the poison, there too they must spew out their life, because there is a great supply of noxiousness around them. It happens too that sometimes this force and exhalation of Avernus strikes and disperses the air that is located between the bird and the earth, so that this place is left nearly empty. When they have come flying straight over this place, the flapping of their wings immediately is futile and falls short, and every effort of their wings on either side is for naught. When they are unable to support themselves and rely on their wings there, of course they plummet to earth because of their weight, forced by nature, and now lying there, through this almost empty air, they disperse their souls through all the pores of the body. Further, moisture in wells becomes colder in summer, because the earth grows porous from the heat, and whatever seeds of warmth it happens to have on its own, it releases into the air. Therefore, the more the earth is exhausted and delivered of its heat, the colder also the moisture concealed in the earth becomes. Further, when all the earth is oppressed by cold and contracts, and so to speak congeals, it of course happens that by coalescing it squeezes out into wells any heat it has in itself. It is said that near the shrine of Ammon there exists a fountain that is cold in the light of day and hot at night time. People marvel at this fountain overmuch and think in part that it is heated by the fierce sun beneath the earth, when night has covered the earth with its dreadful dark shroud. This is exceedingly far removed from true reasoning. For when the sun, caressing the naked body of the water, could not cause it to warm on its upper side, although its light in the upper air is blessed with such great heat, how could it cook the moisture thoroughly from below the earth, so dense in body, and revive it with warming heat? Especially when it is scarcely able to work its own heat in through the walls of houses by means of its burning rays. What then is the reason? Undoubtedly because the soil around the fountain stays more porous than the rest of the earth, and there were many seeds of fire near the body of water. Thus, when night submerges the earth in dew-bearing waves, the earth cools at once deep within and contracts together. For this reason it happens that, as if it were squeezed by hand, it squeezes out into the fountain the seeds of fire it has, which make the touch and warmth of the liquid hot. Then, when the rising sun has loosened the earth with its rays and opened its pores by mixing in warm heat, the elements of fire again return to their former places, and all the heat in the water goes back into the earth. Because of this, the fountain grows cold in the light of day. Besides, the water's moisture is tossed by the rays of the sun and is made thinner by the quivering heat as the light increases. Therefore it happens that whatever seeds of fire it has, it releases, just as it often lets go of the frost it contains in itself, and dissolves the ice and relaxes its bonds. There is also a frigid fountain, above which, if flax be held, it often catches fire at once and projects a flame. And in similar manner, a torch kindled among its waves shines bright, wherever it floats and is driven by the breezes. Doubtless, because there are very many seeds of heat in the water, and from the earth itself deep below, bodies of fire must rise up through the whole fountain, and at the same time are breathed forth and escape into the air, but not so many that the fountain can become hot. Moreover, a force compels them to erupt dispersed suddenly through the water, and to assemble again above it. Of like kind is the spring of Aradus in the sea, which gushes fresh water and parts the salt waves around it. In many other locations, too, the sea's surface provides well-timed assistance to thirsty sailors, because it throws up fresh water among the salt waves. So therefore, those seeds can burst forth through this fountain and gush out, which seeds, when they gather together on the flax or adhere to the body of the torch, easily are ignited at once, since the flax and torches also have and contain many seeds of fire within them. Do you not also see that when you move a recently extinguished wick towards a night lamp, it catches fire before it actually touches the flame, and similarly so does a torch? And moreover, many things are touched by heat alone and ignite at a distance before the fire soaks them at close quarters. Thus we must think that it also happens in that fountain. As to what remains, I will begin to discuss by what law of nature it occurs that that stone can attract iron, which the Greeks call magnet, from the name of its native country, since its origin came to be in the native boundaries of the Magnetes. People are amazed at this stone, for it often makes a chain of little rings hang off of itself. For indeed you can sometimes see 5 or more in suspended succession, jostled by light breezes, when one hangs down from another, clinging from underneath, and each learns from the other the binding force of the stone. So penetratingly and pervasively does its force persist in its potency. In matters of this kind, many things must be established before you can give an account of the thing itself, and it must be approached by exceedingly long and winding roads. All the more I demand that your ears and mind be attentive. First of all, from all things, whatever we see, bodies that strike our eyes and stir up sight must continually flow, be projected, and scattered widely. And odors flow continuously from certain things, just like coolness from rivers, heat from the sun, and spray from the waves of the sea, the gnaw of walls close by the shore. Nor do various sounds ever cease pouring through the air. Lastly, a salty-tasting moisture often forms in our mouths when we spend time near the sea, but when we see wormwood being diluted and mixed, a bitter taste is experienced. So from all things, each thing is carried in a flow and is sent off everywhere in all directions. Neither delay nor any respite is given to the flowing, since we continuously receive sensations, and it is always permitted that we see all things, smell them, and sense their sound. Now I will retell how all things are endowed with porous bodies, as is made clear also in the first book. For indeed, although it is important to know this, for many things it is now especially important to make certain, in the case of this very thing that I am setting out to discuss, that nothing is visible around us except body mixed with void. First it happens that in caves the rocks arrayed above sweat with moisture and trickle with flowing drops. Likewise sweat flows out from our whole body, the beard grows and hair over all our limbs and members. Food is distributed to all the veins and increases and nourishes even the tiniest fingertips and furthest extremities of the body. Likewise, we feel coldness and warm heat wend their way through bronze. Likewise, too, we feel them wend their way through gold and through silver when we are holding filled cups. And then voices wing their way through the stone partitioning walls of houses, and smell waft through, and cold, and the heat of fire, which is also accustomed to penetrate the force of iron. And then, where the corslet of the sky has its boundaries set up, the bodies of clouds and seeds of storm clouds penetrate, together with the power of disease when it enters in from outside. And violent storms that spring from the earth and sky naturally retire and go away into the sky and earth, since there is nothing that is not woven with a porous body. In addition, not all bodies that are thrown off from things are endowed with the same power of moving the senses, nor are they suited in the same way for all things. First, the sun cooks the earth and makes it dry, but it dissolves ice and makes snow piled high in high mountains melt away under the force of its rays. Again, wax becomes liquid when placed in its heat. Likewise, fire liquefies bronze and melts gold, but it draws together and causes skin and hides to contract. Further, the moisture of water hardens iron fresh from the fire, but it softens hides and skin made hard by that. Oleaster is as pleasing to beard-studded she-goats as if it was really dripping ambrosia and was dipped in nectar. Yet there is nothing more bitter for humans than this foliage. Further, the pig avoids marjoram and fears every ointment, because what is bitter poison to bristle-covered pigs is what seems at times almost to restore life to us. In contrast, although mud is the foulest slime to us, the very same stuff is seen to be pleasing to pigs, so that they wallow in it from head to toe and never grow tired of it. There also remains the following which seems to need to be said before I commence to speak about my main topic. Since many pores are allotted to different things, they must be endowed with natures that differ from one another, and each possess their own natures and pathways. For indeed, different senses are present in living creatures, each of which perceives in itself its own proper object. For we see sounds penetrate by one path, juicy flavors by another, and rich smells by yet another. Moreover, one thing is seen to ooze through rocks, another through wood, yet another to pass through gold, and still another to make its way out through silver and glass. For sight is seen to flow through glass, and heat to go through silver, and one thing to travel more quickly than others along the same path. Certainly the nature of the passageways forces this to happen, since they differ in many ways, as we showed a little while before, on account of the different nature and textures of things. Therefore, with all these things confirmed, fixed and established, and prepared and set out in advance for us, for the rest we will easily give an account based on this, and the whole cause that attracts the force of the iron will be revealed. First, very many seeds must flow from this stone, or perhaps even a surge which by means of its blows pushes away all the air located between the rock and the iron. When this space is emptied and a large space in the middle becomes vacated, immediately the first beginnings of the iron slip forward into the vacuum and fall while connected, and it happens that the ring itself follows and so moves with its whole body. Nor does anything cling together more tightly right from its first elements, restricted and linked together, than the natural character and cool hardness of powerful iron. It is thus less wondrous, since it is derived from its elements, if many bodies that spring forth from the iron are unable to be carried into the vacuum without the ring itself following. This it does, and it follows until it has finally reached the stone itself and clung onto it with invisible bonds. The same thing happens in all directions. On whatever side the space is emptied, whether off to the side or above, neighboring bodies are immediately carried into the vacuum. For indeed, they are driven by blows from another side, nor can they rise up into the air of their own accord. To this is also added this further thing to help it be able to happen better and give assistance to the movement, that as soon as the air in front of the ring is made more rarefied and the space is caused to be more void and empty, it immediately happens that whatever air is located to the rear pushes the ring forward, as it were, and propels it from behind. For the air that is placed around things is always buffeting them, but it happens that it propels the iron forward at such a time because the space is empty on one side and it receives it into itself. The air that I am mentioning to you subtly wins its way through the numerous pores of the iron down to its tiny parts, and pushes and drives it like the wind drives ships and sails. Again, all things have to contain air in their body, inasmuch as they are endowed with a porous structure, and air surrounds and is situated next to all things. This air, then, which is hidden deep within the iron, is always tossed about with restless motion, and therefore doubtless strikes the ring, and stirs it up from within. The ring, of course, is carried in the same direction as where it has already once plunged and made an exertion into the empty space. It also happens that the nature of iron pulls back sometimes from this stone, accustomed to flee and follow in turns. I have even seen iron from Samothrace leap up and iron fillings go mad all at once inside bronze bowls when this magnesian stone was placed underneath. So eagerly is the iron seen to desire to flee from the stone. So great a disturbance is created when the bronze is interposed, because no doubt when the emanations of the bronze have seized beforehand and occupied the open pathways of the iron, the emanations of the stone come afterwards and find all full in the iron, nor do they have a path to swim through as before. Therefore, it is forced to collide with and strike the iron texture with its wave. In this way, it spews forth from itself and agitates through the bronze that which otherwise it often ingests. Stop wondering about this in these matters, that the emanations from this stone are not strong enough to also move other things. For some stand firm by their weight, gold is of this type, but some, because they have so porous a structure that the wave flies through intact, are not ever able to be pushed around. Things made of wood are seen to be of this type. The nature of iron is thus located between the two, and when it receives a certain number of bronze particles, then it happens that magnesian stones repel it with their flow. Yet these things are not so foreign to other things that I might supply only a few things of this type, which I could mention, things uniquely suited for one another. First, you see that only mortar holds stones together, wood is joined together only by bull's glue, so that the grain of wooden planks more often cracks and gapes open than the bonds of the bull's glue will relax its binding force. Juices born of the vine are bold enough to be mixed with water from fountains, while heavy pitch and light olive oil cannot. The purple color from shellfish is joined together with the bulk of wool, so it can never ever be pulled apart, not even if you set out to use Neptune's waters to restore it. Not even if the whole sea wished to wash it with all its waves. Again, is there not just one thing that joins gold to gold, and does it not happen that bronze is joined to bronze by tin? Now how many other things might we find? For what? You have no need for you of such a long and winding road, nor is it right for me to waste so much energy on this, but it is best to deal briefly with many things in a few words. When those things whose textures fall together so reciprocally that the concavities of the one fit together with the convexities of the other, and the opposite too among themselves, this is the best joining. It is the case too that certain things can be held and joined together, entangled among themselves as if by rings and hooks. This seems to be more what happens in the case of this stone and iron. Now I will explain the causes of diseases, and from what source the force of disease can suddenly arise and stir up death-bearing destruction for the human race and herds of livestock. First, I have shown by argument above that there are seeds of many things which are life-giving to us, and on the contrary, that there must be many things flying around that bring disease and death. When these happen by chance to have arisen and caused the heavens to be disordered, the air becomes diseased. And this whole force of disease and pestility either comes down through the sky from outside the world, as clouds and storm clouds do, or they often come together and rise from the earth itself, when it is moist and becomes putrid, struck by unseasonably heavy rains and heat spells. Do you not see, too, that those who travel far from their home and fatherland are badly affected by the novelty of the climate and water, because the conditions of life are so different? For in what way do we think the climate of the Britons differs from that in Egypt, where the axis of the world slants down? How does the climate in Pontus differ from that in Gades? Right on to the black races of men with their well-baked color. Just as we see that those climates situated at the four winds and quarters of the sky differ from one another, so the color and appearance of humans are seen to differ greatly, and diseases to hold the peoples each after their kind. There is the elephant disease that arises along the waters of the Nile in the middle of Egypt and nowhere else besides. In Attica, the feet are badly affected, as are the eyes within the borders of Achaia. Hence, different places are harmful to different parts and limbs. The varying air brings this about. So when a sky that happens to be hostile to us sets itself in motion and harmful air begins to creep about, it crawls slowly like fog and clouds, and everywhere it goes it perturbs and compels everything to change. It happens, too, that when it at last comes to our sky, it corrupts it, and makes it similar to itself and hostile to us. And so this new destruction and pestility either falls suddenly on water, or sinks deeply into the crops themselves, or the other fodder of human beings and food of flocks, or it even remains as a force suspended in the air itself, and when we breathe and take in air mixed with it, it too must be absorbed in equal measure into the body. In a similar way, pestility often also falls on cattle, and sickness on lazy, bleeding creatures too. Nor does it make any difference whether we take a journey to places harmful to us and change the mantle of the sky, or nature of her own accord brings a diseased sky to us, or something else that we are not used to experiencing, which is able to affect us badly by its fresh new arrival. This cause of disease and death-bearing wave once rendered the fields lifeless within the borders of sea crops, made the streets desolate, and drained the city of its citizens. For it arose and came from deep within the borders of Egypt, traversing much air and the swimming surfaces of the sea, and at last bore down on the whole people of Pandion. Then they were handed over in batches to disease and death. First they could feel their heads on fire with fever, and their 2 eyes reddening with light welling up beneath. Their blackened throats, too, sweat with blood internally. The path of their voice was hedged in and contracted with ulcers, and the tongue, the interpreter of the mind, poured out blood, weakened by pain, hard to move, and rough to touch. Then when the force of the disease traveled through the throat and filled the chest, flowing right into the grieving heart of the sick, then truly all the barricades of life were collapsing. The breath circulated a foul odor outside the mouth, like the penetrating reek of rotting corpses tossed outdoors. And straightway the strength of the whole mind and all the body languished, then at the very threshold of death. To these evils impossible to bear, anxious anguish and wailing intermingled with groans were constant comrades. Frequent retching, often lasting all day and night, continually compelled them to convulse their sinews and limbs, and broke down and fatigued those already previously exhausted. Nor were you able to discern that the top layer of the body's top surface was burning with excessive heat for anyone, but instead it gave out a feeling of warmth to the hand, and at the same time the whole body reddened, as if branded by ulcers, as happens when the sacred fire is distributed through the limbs. But the inner parts of people were burning all the way to the bones, and a flame was burning in the stomach as if in a furnace. There was nothing light or thin enough that you could turn it to good use for anyone's limbs, but always wind and cold. Some were giving over their limbs, burning from the disease, to cool streams, hurling their naked bodies into the waves. Many fell headlong from on high into well water, hitting the surface with their mouths wide open. An unquenchable, dry thirst, causing them to drench their bodies, made a great shower no more effective than a few drops. Nor was there any rest from their pain. Their bodies lay there exhausted. Medicine mumbled in silent fear, inasmuch as they rolled the orbs of their eyes wide open, burning with disease, and bereft of sleep so many times. Many more signs of death were then given besides. The rational faculty of the mind was perturbed by grief and fear. The brow was gloomy, the facial expression frenzied and wild. And further, the ears were agitated and filled with loud noises. The breath frequent or drawn deeply at irregular intervals, the glistening drops of sweat running down the neck, spit thin and scarce and tinged with yellow color, and salty, scarcely ejected through the throat with a hoarse cough. But the sinews in the hands did not hesitate to contract, nor the limbs to tremble, nor cold to move up little by little from the feet. Likewise, in the end, at the final moment, the nostrils were compressed, the tip of the nose sharp and thin, the eyes retracted, the temples hollow, the skin cold and hard, the mouth agape, the forehead tense and swollen. And not much later, the limbs lay stiffened in death. For the most part, it was on the 8th shining light of the sun, or even on its 9th illumination, that they gave up their life. If any of them, as it happened, had escaped the ruinous rites of death, afterwards horrible ulcers and a black discharge from the bowels saw to it that a withering death still awaited them, or else a large quantity of corrupted blood, often in close conjunction with a headache, was emitted from choked nostrils. Into this the person's whole strength and substance flowed. Further, for the one who escaped the fierce discharge of foul blood, the disease still traveled into the sinews and limbs, and even into the genital parts of the body. And some, fearing with great severity the threshold of death, continued to live once their manly parts were cut off by the knife, and others yet remained in life without benefit of hands or feet, and some suffered the loss of their eyes. So far had the piercing fear of death come over them. And 2, a total forgetfulness of all things seized some, so that they could not recognize who they were. And although many bodies lay on the ground unburied on top of other bodies, still the race of birds and beasts either leapt far away to avoid the acrid smell, or after a taste became weak at their imminent death. Nor yet scarcely at all in those days could any bird be found, nor would the sad generations of wild beasts leave the forests. Most were weakened by the disease and died. The faithful force of dogs especially was strewn on every road, and they reluctantly gave up their spirit. For the force of the disease would wring out the life from their limbs. Deserted, empty funerals competed to be hurried up. Nor was there a sure method of cure that worked for all. For what allowed one to inhale the life-giving breezes of the air and gaze upon the regions of the sky, this was destruction to others and brought them death. In these affairs, this one distressing thing above all had to be pitied, that when anyone realized he was caught in the snares of the disease, just as if he were condemned to death, his spirit failed and he lay down with grieving heart. Awaiting his death, he would lose his life there and then. For indeed at no time did the contagion of the devouring disease stop seizing upon one after another, as if they were wool-bearing flocks in the stock of horned cattle. And this, above all else, heaped death on death. For whoever avoided going and seeing their own sick, excessively greedy for life and being afraid of death, was punished soon after by slaughtering neglect with a foul and evil death, abandoned and without aid. But those who stayed around to help died from contagion, and the labor that shame then forced them to undergo, and the coaxing voice of the sick mixed with the voice of lamentation. The most virtuous people underwent this type of death. Lacuna. And one upon others, striving to bury the throng of their own dead, they returned worn out from weeping and wailing. Then, for the most part, they took to their beds in grief. Nor was anyone able to be found whom disease or death or grief had not affected badly at so terrible a time. Now, moreover, the shepherd and every herdsman, and likewise the strong wielder of the curved plough, drooped from weakness, and their bodies lay piled up deep within their huts, handed over to death by poverty and disease. At times you were able to see the lifeless bodies of parents on top of their lifeless children, and conversely you could see children taking their last breath on top of their mothers and fathers. This affliction flowed in no small part from the country into the city, for the weakened and diseased band of farmers brought it with them as they arrived from every direction. They filled all spaces and houses, so that all the more with the heat death was heaping them packed together in piles. Many bodies, prostrate from thirst and toppled over in the street, lay strewn by the Silenus water fountains. Their breath was choked off by the excessive allure of water, and many you would see scattered throughout the public places and roads, drooping limbs with bodies barely alive, studded with muck and completely covered with rags, dying from bodily filth, Nothing more than skin and bones, nearly buried already by foul ulcers and scum. At last death filled up all the holy shrines of the gods with lifeless bodies, and everywhere all the temples of the heavenly ones remained burdened with corpses, which places the temple guardians had packed with guests. Nor indeed any longer was reverence of the gods or their divinity of much worth. The present grief was completely overwhelming. Nor did those burial rites continue in the city, with which these people before were always traditionally buried. For the whole populace was perturbed, and in a panic, and each one grieving buried his own dead hastily as time allowed. The suddenness of events and poverty led to many horrible actions, for they placed their own blood relatives with tremendous wailing on top of funeral pyres heaped high for others, and set torches beneath them, often violently quarreling with great bloodshed rather than desert the bodies.